Al-Ghazali's economic warning from 900 years ago. When we think about the history of economics, the same names almost always come to mind. Adam Smith, Karl Marx. Maybe, if we go back even further, Aristotle. It's often presented as if economic thought began with them. But hidden in the pages of history is a name that receives far less attention. And yet, nearly 1,000 years ago, this man made observations about inflation, wealth inequality, speculation, monetary policy, and financial crises that still feel remarkably relevant today. If you heard some of his words on the evening news, you probably wouldn't believe they were spoken in the 11th century. Because Al-Ghazali didn't see economics as nothing more than numbers and markets. To him, an economy was a reflection of human character. And perhaps his most powerful warning could be summed up like this. When money loses its moral compass, society begins to decay. So who was this man? And why is his name rarely mentioned when people talk about the history of economics? To answer that question, we have to travel back nearly 1,000 years. The year is around 1100. At the time, Europe was a very different place from the economic powerhouse we know today. Small feudal kingdoms fought one another, trade was limited, and much of the continent remained relatively poor by modern standards. But if you looked east, the picture changed completely. The Islamic world was experiencing one of the greatest periods in its history. Trade routes stretched from Al-Andalus in Spain all the way to Central Asia, connecting civilizations across continents. Baghdad, Damascus, Cairo, Bokhara, Nishapur. These weren't just large cities. They were global centers of science, commerce, and culture. Silk arrived from China. Spices flowed from India. Gold crossed the deserts of Africa. Merchant ships unloaded goods from every corner of the Mediterranean. Everything moved through an enormous commercial network. In some of Baghdad's marketplaces, it wasn't unusual to meet traders from a dozen different regions of the world in a single afternoon. In many ways, this was one of history's earliest examples of globalization. But history teaches us something interesting. Every great economic boom creates new opportunities. It also creates new temptations. As wealth increases, greed often grows alongside it. The more money circulates, the more people begin searching for new ways to obtain it. Some create value. Some build businesses. Some trade honestly. Others learn how to manipulate the system for their own benefit. And it was during this exact period that Al-Ghazali lived. Born in 1058 in the city of Tus, in present-day Iran, Al-Ghazali lost his father at a young age. Despite growing up in modest circumstances, his passion for learning quickly became obvious. He studied Islamic law, theology, logic, philosophy. Within just a few years, his reputation spread far beyond Khorasan and throughout the Islamic world. By his mid-30s, he had become a professor at the famous Nizamiya Academy in Baghdad. This wasn't an ordinary school. If today's world has institutions like Oxford, Harvard, or Cambridge, the Nizamiya represented that same level of prestige in the medieval Islamic world. Thousands of students, judges, government officials, scholars, all came to study under him. From the outside, it seemed he had achieved everything a scholar could hope for. Fame, respect, influence, wealth. He had it all. Then something completely unexpected happened. Al-Ghazali walked away from it. He resigned from his position. He stopped teaching. He left Baghdad behind. For nearly 10 years, he traveled through Damascus, Jerusalem, and the Hijaz, living a life of reflection and spiritual retreat. Historians still debate why. Some believe he experienced a profound spiritual crisis. Others argue that he had become deeply troubled by the direction society was heading. Perhaps both explanations are true. Because Al-Ghazali was watching a civilization grow richer while becoming morally weaker. Cities expanded. Markets flourished. Trade reached unprecedented levels. But beneath all that prosperity, something else was quietly growing. Greed. Money was no longer simply a tool. It was becoming life's ultimate goal. And that was the question that began to occupy Al-Ghazali's mind. What happens when a civilization becomes wealthy before it becomes wise? At first glance, that sounds like a philosophical question. In reality, it goes straight to the heart of economics. Because for Al-Ghazali, economics was never just about supply and demand. It was also about trust. When people act honestly, trade grows. Contracts mean something. markets become stronger. But once trust begins to disappear, even the most prosperous economy starts to rot from within. This is where Al-Ghazali stood apart from most thinkers of his time. He didn't begin with money. He began with human nature. Only then did he turn his attention to money itself. Surprisingly, he didn't consider money inherently valuable. To him, it was nothing more than a tool. To explain this, he used a remarkable metaphor that still resonates today. He said, "Money is like a mirror." At first, that comparison sounds strange. What could money possibly have in common with a mirror? But his explanation was beautifully simple. A mirror has no value because of what it is. Its value comes from what it reflects. Money is exactly the same. Its importance doesn't come from the gold or silver it's made of. Its real purpose is to help people produce, exchange, and cooperate with one another in an atmosphere of trust. That single idea became the foundation of Al-Ghazali's entire economic philosophy. Yet he believed that society had begun forgetting this simple truth. People were no longer treating money as a means to an end. Money itself had become the end. And perhaps, that is where every major economic crisis truly begins. But if money is only a tool, then what happens when people begin treating it as the ultimate goal? This was the question that fascinated Al-Ghazali. And his answer was surprisingly modern. He believed that money should never remain idle. In his view, wealth locked away in chests, buried underground, or hoarded for the sake of accumulation wasn't simply unproductive. It was harmful. Think of the human body for a moment. Blood keeps every organ alive because it constantly circulates. The moment that circulation stops, the body begins to fail. Al-Ghazali believed money worked in exactly the same way. An economy survives because money moves. It pays workers. It finances merchants. It allows farmers to buy seeds, craftsmen to purchase tools, families to provide for their children. Every transaction creates another opportunity for someone else. But once large amounts of wealth stop circulating, that chain begins to break. The problem wasn't that society had run out of resources. The problem was that resources were no longer reaching the people who needed them. Centuries later, economists would describe similar ideas using terms like liquidity, velocity of money, and capital circulation. Al-Ghazali didn't use any of those words. Yet he had already understood the underlying principle. Money fulfills its purpose only when it moves. That didn't mean he believed people shouldn't save. Saving for the future wasn't the problem. Turning wealth into an object of worship was. Because once wealth becomes the destination instead of the vehicle, human behavior begins to change. People become less interested in creating value and more interested in protecting or multiplying what they already possess. According to Al-Ghazali, this was where moral decline quietly entered the economy. His criticism didn't stop there. He was equally concerned about another growing problem: speculation. Even in the 11th century, there were merchants who deliberately held back goods from the market, waiting for shortages to drive prices higher. Others spread misleading information or manipulated supply to increase profits. To many, this looked like clever business. To Al-Ghazali, it was something entirely different. It was profit without contribution. Profit that depended not on creating value, but on exploiting uncertainty and human suffering. He warned that once this behavior became normal, markets would slowly lose something far more valuable than money. They would lose trust. And without trust, markets cannot function for very long. After all, every trade is built on an invisible promise. The buyer believes the seller is being honest. The seller believes the payment has value. Both sides trust that the rules will be respected. Take that trust away, and even the strongest marketplace begins to fall apart. Today, economists often talk about information asymmetry, transaction costs, and moral hazard. Al-Ghazali didn't have those technical terms, but he understood the human reality behind them nearly 900 years earlier. Because in the end, economics wasn't just about prices. It was about people. And people, more than anything else, respond to incentives. The wrong incentives create the wrong behavior. Eventually, the wrong behavior creates the wrong society. But here's what makes Al-Ghazali's philosophy so remarkable. He wasn't against wealth. He wasn't against commerce. And he certainly wasn't calling for people to abandon business or live in poverty. Quite the opposite. He believed trade was one of the foundations of a healthy civilization. Every honest merchant, Every skilled craftsman, every farmer, every worker played a role in strengthening society. To Al-Ghazali, creating wealth through honest work wasn't something to be ashamed of. It was something to be respected. What he opposed was wealth without value, money earned through deception, manipulation, fraud, or the suffering of others. He frequently warned merchants against practices that were surprisingly common for his time: using false weights, hiding defects in products, lying about quality, artificially restricting supply, creating panic simply to raise prices. Today, these might sound like obvious examples of fraud, but nearly 1,000 years ago, Al-Ghazali saw something deeper. Every dishonest transaction damages more than the person being cheated. It weakens confidence in the entire marketplace. Imagine walking through a market where every merchant might be lying, where every scale might be inaccurate, where every product might hide a defect. How long would you continue shopping there? Probably not very long. Now imagine that same uncertainty spreading across an entire economy. Businesses become suspicious of one another. Consumers hesitate before buying. Investors become cautious. Growth slows, not because people suddenly stopped producing, but because trust quietly disappeared. This is one of the reasons historians often describe trust as the invisible infrastructure of every economy. Roads transport goods. Ports connect continents. Banks move capital. But trust makes all of those systems possible in the first place. Without it, even the best institutions eventually begin to fail. Al-Ghazali understood this centuries before economics became an academic discipline. He also believed that labor itself possessed a special dignity. Work wasn't simply a way to earn money. It was a way to contribute to society. Someone who built, produced, taught, farmed, or traded honestly was creating value that extended far beyond personal profit. By contrast, wealth acquired without meaningful contribution carried a hidden danger, not only for the individual, but for society as a whole. Because when people discover that manipulation pays better than production, more people begin choosing manipulation. And over time, the economy slowly shifts away from creating value toward extracting it. History has shown this pattern again and again. Whether in speculative bubbles, financial fraud, or periods of extreme inequality, the incentives people respond to often shape the destiny of entire civilizations. But Al-Ghazali wasn't only watching merchants. He was watching rulers as well. And in his view, governments were just as capable of destroying trust as dishonest traders. Perhaps even more so. One of his strongest criticisms was directed at rulers who secretly reduced the gold or silver content of their coins. At first glance, it seemed like an easy solution. The government could mint more coins, spend more money, and temporarily solve its financial problems. But Al-Ghazali believed this wasn't economic policy. It was hidden theft. The coin might look exactly the same. It might carry the same stamp, the same ruler, the same promise, but its real value had quietly been reduced. And once people realized that, something even more valuable than gold would disappear: confidence. Because money only works when people believe tomorrow's coin will still be worth something tomorrow. The moment that belief begins to fade, the entire system starts to shake.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and hit the like button. Make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.